Welcome to the show. I'm Jordan Harbinger. AJ Jacobs, today's guest, he's a big weirdo, but that's really why I like him. He spent a year living according to the Bible in the most literal way possible. He's gone to great lengths to run social experiments that would, and in fact do, make most of us cringe just thinking about them. He's got a real knack for putting himself in situations where he's able to examine current rules and think in a totally different way and then break our default mode that we get from culture, social programming, etc., and replace it with something else entirely. His latest experiment was to thank 1,000 people that made his morning cup of coffee possible, from the bean farmers in Colombia, to the truckers who get the stuff to the States, to the barista who hands him the cup at the end of the journey. Thankfully, though, this isn't just another gratitude episode, and far from it. In fact, we'll separate our idea of gratitude and contrast it with positive thinking and all that other associated BS. We'll learn to acknowledge the role of luck in our lives, which leads to compassion, which, hopefully, leads us to discover what really matters to us in this life, whether that's some feeling of interconnectedness or just a nice, fresh cup of coffee. I get great guests like this because of my network, and I'm teaching you how to do this as well for personal and professional reasons in my course, 6-Minute Networking. You can find that for free at jordanharbinger.com/course. In the meantime, enjoy this episode with AJ Jacobs. Well, you were on, a few years back when we first met, you were doing some sort of experiment for another book where you were living biblically.
Yes,
for,
exactly.
Was it a year?
It was a year.
That's a long time.
A year. Oh my God.
To not shave.
No, I know. And my wife would kiss me for 7 months. It was a serious thing.
It's funny because my first thought was your wife must be a very patient woman to have put up with that.
She is a patient woman. But I gotta the best part is when people email about how wonderful she is. Because I can forward that, and that buys me a little credit that I can.
She wouldn't kiss you because you had a beard?
Yeah, she just didn't like the beard. She said it was, I think it is. I looked into it. I think it is the same texture as like the pubic hair. And she's like, yeah.
And she's like, okay, now I really can't get that out of my head. Although she had to be patient, because if you're doing the biblical living thing, you could have traded her for like a goat or something.
That is such a good idea. I tried to get extra wives because, in the Old Testament, you can have 12, 15, but she put the kibosh on that.
Put the kibosh,
Yeah, it was sad.
Yeah, that is, but then maybe she did you a favor, because maybe you don't get, maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be.
Oh, no. I mean, I think it is very stressful, like time management. I have a chapter in my book about family, about polyamory, and I have no ethical problems with polyamory, but these people, I mean, they showed me their Google calendars, and it is like a mosaic. It's so complicated trying to figure out which of your lovers to be with at what time.
It's just, and it sounds like no matter what, you're going to end up with people that are unhappy, right? Because you're not going to get somebody who's like, it's not my Tuesday. You're going to get people who are like, no, I don't feel good. I want you to come over and do, and then so you got to shuffle everything. It's like, hey, hold all my calls.
Exactly.
I got a sick wife, but now what if you have two sick wives? Then
It's
what?
very complicated.
Yeah.
Well, one thing that I thought was really interesting is they try to cultivate the opposite of jealousy. That this
compersion?
Yes, I'm so impressed.
I don't know why I know that.
I love that.
I've never had that feeling in my life.
I have never experienced it. I would love to, but compersion, as you know, it's the joy you get from your partner's joy. So if your partner is having great sex with some other guy, you feel compersion instead of jealousy.
Yeah, no.
And if my wife slept with some other guy,
you'd want it to be terrible.
The worst sex she ever had.
Yeah. Oh, God, that was just, why did I ever even think about doing that? That's what I would want to hear if I had to pick one.
But I do think it is a wonderful, because I do think schadenfreude, the joy at other people's pain, is a terrible emotion. And I have it and I hate it. I hate having it. But, and this is the opposite. So, if I were a better human being, I would experience compersion someday.
Well, maybe. I mean, do you have to have the complete opposite, or can you just have the absence of both and be fine?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it doesn't have to have, like my wife has sex with another. Maybe she has a great omelet at a restaurant.
I'm okay with that.
Then I feel compersion for that.
drawing the line at omelets. My point of the original sort of biblical reference here is that you were in a situation where you're able to examine your current rules and then go, all right, I'm going to break out of this as completely as I can. I mean, you're still in New York City, so it's not like you're turning everything off. It's not like, all right, nobody's allowed to do anything modern anymore, right? But you can break free of culture in some way, social programming in some way, and replace it with something else entirely,
Right.
which is kind of like your thing with the biblical thing. And then after that, you're like, okay, well, you know what, before we get into the next thing that you did, which I think is also interesting, what are some rules that you found that we modern humans follow out of habit, but you no longer really feel connected to after having done the biblical thing?
Oh, that's a great idea. Well, I think there are a lot of ways to answer that. I mean, it really did make me realize that in biblical times, they didn't have this idea of an individual. It was all about the community, like respect your elders. Like you have to stand when an old person comes into the room. So I would do that. And I went to Florida once, or Sarasota, in a restaurant. I was just like up and down the whole night. But it was lovely because I think that's another example. We don't value the elderly in our culture as much.
Kind of the opposite.
Yeah, it's a youth-oriented culture. And now that I'm getting old, I'm like,
there's something to that.
Yeah, those old people are so wise.
Yeah.
But it made you realize that, and it made me realize they were all about, as I say, the community, the responsibility to the community. And we are all about the rights, individual rights. I have the right to everything. And I think there's a balance. And I think we've gone too far to the individual side. I think I'm all for individual rights, but also what is your responsibility to the community? So that was kind of
yeah, that is interesting. Because I'll tell you, I don't think about my responsibility to the community that much. I think about my responsibility to the listeners all the time during the show, during the preparation for the show.
Well, that's community. That's community.
That's true, I suppose. But then there's another part of me that's like, why is this person walking so slow? Move. But that might be New York kind of thing.
Yeah. No, can't be
a slow walker here.
I am a fan of fast walking as well. And also, I'm a fan of fast listening. I listen to your podcast on double speed.
All right.
You're actually quite a fast talker.
I am. I was going to say, so that's really 3x.
Yeah, you're like at 3x. But I could still catch most of what you say. I might have missed some pearls of wisdom, but mostly I catch you.
It's worth it. It's worth it to speed things up.
Oh, yeah.
Listening at 1x is painful for most people, I think, now, who listen to a lot of audiobooks, podcasts. Have you ever tried to listen to an audiobook at 1x and you're like, what's your problem? Why are you going so slow?
Oh, I know.
Nobody talks that slow.
And particularly like certain stations like NPR, that's like half speed. And the weird thing is when you talk to someone who you've listened to at double speed and in person, I mean, you're fast enough that I don't think that there's some developmental challenges.
Yeah.
But some people, it's like, oh my God, what's going on?
Yeah. You're like, look, Ira, can we get this moving here?
And I don't know if that's good or bad. Maybe patience is a lost virtue, but
yeah, probably. But I don't miss it. I'll tell you, if I lost it, I don't miss it. Conversely, what are some habits or maybe rules you've added as a result of, especially the year of living biblically, that made positive shifts for you in your life? Like, yes, maybe you value old people a little bit more. Is there anything where you went, I'm going to shave off this beard so that I can kiss my wife, but I'm not going to get rid of.
Oh yeah, for sure. I kept dozens. Well, I did stop stoning adulterers. As you know, I stoned them, but I used very small stones like pebbles, so I didn't get arrested. But there were tons, and I'm sure we'll talk about gratitude, but that was big in the Bible. There were the Sabbath, which is this idea. It's almost like a digital detox from 2,000 years ago. This idea, starting Friday at sundown, or depending on your religion, Sunday, just get off all devices. They don't say that in the Bible, but they say stop working, devote it to what's around you. Look around, devote it to your friends, to your family, to having meals, having wine. The Bible overall is pro-alcohol. It says sometimes it's bad, but most of the time it's a gift from God. So that was good.
Nice.
But yeah, I thought that that was an amazing.
So you picked up a drinking habit. Got it.
That's the main takeaway. Drink a lot. But yeah, I thought this idea of 1 day a week, carving it out just to really focus this. And as I say, it's like a digital detox. It's like separating and saying, because we get so caught up and.
Yeah. So do you on your Sabbath, did you do the Jewish Sabbath like Friday night to Saturday night or something, or did you pick
I
Sunday?
did. I went with that. And I didn't do, the traditional Jewish Sabbath, which is like, you can't turn on and off lights.
That is a whole thing. We were walking by a store the other day here in Manhattan, no surprise, and it was like the Sabbath switch, and you turn it on Sabbath mode, and it does some sort of like electricity saving, but light turn on and off in the kosher way. I think it was called a kosher switch.
Kosher switch. And then there are kosher elevators that stop on every floor, so you don't have to press the button.
Oh, gosh.
But that's not actually in the Bible. They don't talk about elevators. They just say don't work, so I would not work. And sometimes I would try to use it to my advantage. Like, my wife would say, take out the garbage. Sorry. Cannot do that's the Sabbath. But most of the time it was a positive, where it was a time to reflect and just, stop the madness. So that was good. There were, I talk about in the book, there are so many insane rules because it's an old tribal book written by some, people who had some issues. But on the other hand, it does have some wonderful wisdom, and the Sabbath is one, gratitude. Not gossiping as much. I still gossip.
I broke that one the other day.
Did you?
Probably yesterday, and maybe every day a little bit.
Probably before we were
possibly.
Yeah. But it is. I tried it, and I still try to do it. I still gossip, but I would say I gossip 40% less. So that's
not
something.
Bad. Not bad.
But it's actually quite freeing because you kind of feel dirty. It's like having junk food. You feel it's like good going down, but then you feel dirty afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So there is something I would recommend people try for a week. Just try not to trash talk anyone and see how it goes. And I think you'll notice this remarkable mental shift.
Yeah, that's interesting. I need to take some of that medicine. I wonder, when you're getting rid of all these modern rules in favor of the old, there must be a lot of, when you're going through the old here, going, okay, why can't I wear mixed fabrics? Like, where's the origin of this? And this is just kind of dumb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there were some, as you say, you cannot wear clothes made of mixed fibers. And, what? I thought that seemed like micromanaging. God was micromanaging. And it was like, but the arguments from the religious people is that actually following those is even more important because it shows your commitment. It shows your almost your willpower. Like you can do something that makes no sense whatsoever. So
where does that one come from? Do you even know? That I just can't.
Well, there are a bunch of theories, but no one knows for sure. I mean, one is that linen and wool. Linen, I guess wool is from the shepherds, and linen is from the farmers, and the farmers and the shepherds had a feud. Who knows?
So it's like one of the earliest form of regulation. Like, hey, you can't wear mixed fabrics, but my shirts are always cotton. Well, guess you have to only buy cotton.
Exactly.
And then the farmers are like, you bastards. Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Okay. Well, I guess we'll never know.
We'll never know.
Literally, we'll never know. So one of the shifts you had was gratitude, I know. And you mentioned that earlier, which kind of led you going down the whole rabbit hole of proving that all humans were essentially or are actually related.
Oh, yes. That was my previous book.
And can we talk about that for a second?
Of course.
I'm kind of taking people through your journey in case they haven't heard that episode. Because I think that's something that people go, yeah, all humans, we're all from Africa, et cetera. But then we really don't treat each other like that at all.
Oh, no.
Of course.
And that one started because I got this email out of the blue from this guy who said, you don't know me, but I'm your 8th cousin. And I, of course, thought, okay, he's going to ask me to wire $10,000 to Nigeria.
Try Herbalife. Yeah. It's a family business.
But he didn't. It turns out he was legitimate, and he is one of this group of people, thousands of people, scientists and researchers, who are trying to do something unprecedented, which is to build the biggest family tree in history.
Wow.
And it's not a tree, it's a forest, because we're talking not thousands, millions of people. Right now it's about 150 million people all connected on the same tree from over 100 countries, every ethnicity you could think of. And I loved, I mean, one part of me was like, do I really want 150 million cousins? You know, I have some members of my family now that I'd be happy to cut out.
Sure. Yeah. There are actual first cousins that I'm like, I'm good.
Exactly.
Had enough of you.
But another part of me was like, you know, this is astounding. This is what a concept, because we've been taught this cliche from when we were kids that we're all one big family.
Right.
But now you can see it concretely through DNA, through these massive online Wikipedia-like family trees where thousands of people are working together. And you can actually see the connections. It's like 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. So, for instance, Barack Obama, this is true, is my 5th great aunt's husband's brother's wife's 7th great nephew. So we're very close, as you can see.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to like communicate that to him somehow?
I think I did send a note, you know, inviting him to Thanksgiving, and I haven't heard. But I will say this, that sometimes it works. It's like a social network. It's like the new social network. Because for this book, I wanted to interview George H.W. Bush, because I figured he was the patriarch of this historic family. So I called his chief of staff and said, I'd like to interview President Bush. She says, he's not doing any interviews. And I said, totally understand. Just so he knows, and you know, we are cousins. And I told her how. We were like 12 cousins, 3 times removed. And remarkably, she said, well, in that case, let me see what I can do. So just as a very practical tool for entrepreneurs or whoever's out there, you might want to go on these websites that have these family trees, and it's like LinkedIn. You know, you can approach people and say your cousin. Half of them are going to say, never contact me again.
Right, like, oh, this is too creepy. I almost wonder, did she read the whole thing? Did she just stop it? Well, we're cousins. Let me tell you how. And she's like, I don't. That's fine. Let me see. And then she's right, because if she'd read, I'm your 16th third cousin twice removed, she would have been like, doesn't that include pretty much most of the United States or whatever?
Well, it was funny.
Yeah.
When I interviewed him, I told him who he was related to distantly, and he was getting into it. Like, he was related to Clinton, and he loves George Clooney, even though Clooney's like a flaming liberal. So I told him how he was distantly related to Clooney. He had, rest in peace, he had a crush on Terry Hatcher. Yeah, do you remember her?
No, but we're about to find out, because I'm sure that I know who that is. Hold on.
She was on Desperate Housewives. So it was, I got to tell him how he was related to her, which...
That's funny. Oh yeah, her. Okay, so it's... When you're at that level of power, it seems like if you have a crush on someone, you can just be like, hey, I want to like have coffee and get this out of my system. And they're like, oh my God, the president wants to, or, you know, something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it seems that JFK pulled that card.
Yeah, he pulled a couple extra strings that maybe most of us well, we won't go down that path. This leads us to the whole coffee thing, though.
Right.
Weird sort of chasing zebras down rabbit holes is kind of your thing.
I like that, the chasing zebras down rabbit hole. Well, yeah, part of that book was all about, part of the relatives book was all about connection, and that we are, in fact, connected. And the hope was, which is a little idealistic, that we would treat each other with a little more kindness. And I do believe it happened. Like, I call it the Judge Judy effect. Because, you know, Judge Judy, I always found her to be abrasive, obnoxious, like one of the least pleasant people on earth. But then I found out she's my 6th cousin, and I was like, you know what? She's not so bad. She's just Judge Judy. And it's a little irrational, I know, but this idea of connection is very strong. So the connection theme was a big motivator of my next book, which was about, as you mentioned, my cup of coffee. And what I tried to do was thank 1,000 people who had even the smallest role in making my cup of coffee possible.
And like 1,000, you go, oh, that's not a lot. That's a lot.
Oh my God, it was
people.
a lot.
100 people would be a tedious.
No, it
process.
was way more than I anticipated.
10 times that many.
And, you know, I went wide. So I thanked the obvious people like the farmer of the coffee beans and the barista. But I also, you know, I would go out and meet the truck driver who drove the coffee beans. Or I remember I called the woman who did pest control for the warehouse where my coffee beans are stored. And I called her up and I said, I know this is a little strange, but I just want to thank you for keeping the insects out of my coffee. And she said, yeah, that is strange, but thank you. You know, I don't get a lot of appreciation.
Yeah.
And that was one of the themes of the book, that we take hundreds of people for granted. And everything we do requires hundreds, thousands of interconnected people, and that we take for granted. And just making this mental switch, just from a selfish point of view, is very good, because it really does help you appreciate the hundreds of things that go right every day, instead of focusing on the 3 or 4 that go wrong. So there was really a selfish motivation for this book, because I talk about we all have our Larry David side and our Mr. Rogers side. And I was born with a very strong Larry David side, the grumpy pessimist. And this, which is fine. I love watching Larry David, but it's not fun to be in that mindset.
Yeah, watching it is different. Watching it, you go, look, this guy's so grumpy. Like, he sees a bit negative side and everything. You don't necessarily want to be that.
Exactly.
It's funny because we go, better you than me. Look at this guy complaining about every little thing.
Yeah,
right?
But living it, being in that mindset, which I find myself a lot, is not a great way to live. So this was an attempt to bulk up that Mr. Rogers side, get him ripped, and because it is so linked to happiness. There's so much evidence, psychological studies, about how gratitude there's a great quote that happiness does not lead to gratitude. Gratitude leads to happiness. So having that mindset really will make you happier.
That's important, and I want to dial in on that a little, because the whole gratitude thing is really trendy these days. And it's so trendy that it's a little dangerous, because people like me might overlook it. I'm like the opposite of the wisdom of crowds type of person. I think, and I realize that's a bad thing. I think I'm like a wisdom hipster, where like when everybody's going, hey man, you should do this, gratitude, I'm like, oh, well, in that case, I'm not gonna do that.
Right. I love it.
And then my producer and I are like, yeah, we're resisting that because it's BS trending garbage. But you can really throw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, yeah, that's my as I say, I think I'm naturally cynical and Larry David like, but forcing yourself to be grateful, even if you pretend for a while, then actually it sinks in. So you might want to try, I know all of my projects have actually shown to me how powerful this idea of acting as if, this fake it till you feel it idea. Yeah. So I had to fake it for a long time. I would wake up in a grumpy mood, but I'd be like, I have to spend an hour calling or visiting people and thanking them. And
I'm not in the mood to do that
right
now.
So it was like acting. It was like method acting. And I would force myself to do it. But I'll tell you, by the end of that hour, your mind, the cognitive dissonance is too much. Your mind will switch over to gratefulness. And I've seen this hundreds of times in these life experiments I do. I did one where I had to try to be the best husband ever, because all these people wrote in and said,
do that one,
there you go. Oh, that's dangerous. You don't want, it's scary,
The people told you not to do it?
No, they told me I should, because I had put my wife through so much misery with my beard and such.
With the beard, among other things. I'm sure if she had to pick, the beard wouldn't even make the top 10.
Yeah, I'd say it's top 10. But yeah, there was some not touching her while she menstruated. That was annoying to her.
I'm sure. Like, hey, you can't sit next to me.
Oh yeah, no. I mean, if you take the Bible literally, then any seat where a menstruating woman has sat is impure. And my wife found that.
With that.
My wife found it offensive, so she sat in every seat in our apartment, and I had to stand for most of the year. Yeah. So the idea was, these people wrote, you should try to be the best husband you could be, and so it was a month of, the Kate Hudson movies and foot massages, things like that. It was not not always pleasant. But one interesting thing I noticed was, as part of this, every day I would force myself, even if I was annoyed at my wife, I would force myself to buy her a little gift, like a little scented candle. And I would bring it to her. And just by that act, I sort of convinced my brain, oh, I'm bringing a gift to my wife every day. I must really love her. And it catches up. So I do believe this idea of, there's a great quote, I wish I'd come up with it myself, but it says, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than to think your way into a new way of acting. So act as if you're confident. That's a big one for me, because I don't think I'm naturally confident, but I pretend I am.
So far, so good, though. You're killing it with the acting today, then. You have multiple water bottles, huh?
I like to bring my own beverages. I do. I have,
is it water or is it
coffee and water?
Gotcha.
Coffee and water.
Okay. Gotcha.
So yeah, you gotta get both. And since we're talking about coffee, I figured I should.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so your default state was kind of like grumpy and impatience, which, by the way, amen to that. Speaking of the Bible, I get it, because there are many days where I'll wake up and I'll go, got to do the gratitude thing because it's going to be one of those days.
Oh yeah,
you know.
No, I know. I mean, it is hard. I was just trying last night because I was having trouble falling asleep, so I used this hack where I try to, instead of counting sheep, I'll count things that I'm grateful for, and I do it alphabetically, like the apple pancakes my kids made last weekend. And B is Barry. You ever see the HBO show Barry?
I haven't.
Oh,
I know what
fantastic.
it is, but I haven't seen it.
Henry Winkler. So I was like, I'm thankful for Barry, but it's hard. I had to force myself. So yes, forcing yourself to be grateful. And the origin of this idea was because I had read all these studies like you had about gratitude and all the health benefits. And as you know, it's a little annoying, but it's like, evidence is evidence. I'm going to try to be more grateful. So I started this ritual before meals where I would say a prayer of thanksgiving. But I'm not really religious. So instead of thanking God, I would try to thank some of the people who made my food possible, like the farmer who grew the tomatoes, the cashier who rang them up, and my son, who was 10 at the time, wisely pointed out that this was totally lame because those people can't hear me.
Oh, right. So you're like lazily doing half the equation.
Exactly. It's half the equation. So he said, if you really cared, you would go thank them in person. And that was like, it's
man.
That is a nice, that's a good book idea. So he earned his supper that night. And that's what set me off on this journey for not quite a year, but several months going around the world.
Wow.
Thanking people.
So gratitude leads to happiness and not the other way around. And that's kind of the key. Did you try? You must have had a spreadsheet of people that you'd thanked so that you know, right? Or did you just keep tally on the wall? Or
Oh, no, I had a spreadsheet. And I mean, the thing is, in one sense, thanking 1,000 people is insane.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I could have spent 50 years doing this, because you realize I could have gone to 1 million. I mean, think about the guy who drove the truck. You got to thank the people who paved the road,
right,
and the people who painted the yellow lines on the road so the truck didn't veer into oncoming traffic.
Somebody designed that truck.
Someone designed
Well,
that
a lot
truck.
of people designed and tested and painted that truck.
And the tires,
right,
and then the guy who made the paint, for either the guy who made the chemicals for the paint. So it was an amazing lesson in how much goes in. And it was actually very relevant to my own life, because I'm an author. So this book says by A.J. Jacobs, which is a total lie.
Right.
Because it is my book, yes. But then there were the designers, the editors, the people who designed the font, the people who cut down the trees for the paper. There are still paper books.
I was going to say the 5 copies of paper that you probably all are still in your house. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's in everything. So it does make you, I think that it just made me a little bit less self-involved.
Sure.
And which ironically makes you happier. The more, I think when in my 20s, I was only focused on my own happiness, and weirdly, that made me miserable. And as soon as I forced myself to try to think of other people, it had the paradoxical but wonderful effect of making me happier.
It's so interesting. And I suppose it's because as humans, we're wired biologically to, it's like a survival thing, right? I want to focus on the 1 in 100 things that is negative or going wrong, because the other 99 things are going right, so they don't really require my attention right now.
Totally. I really do. I agree with you. I mean, evolutionary psychologists will tell you, you want to focus on the lion, because that, or the one mushroom in 1,000 that is poisonous.
Sure.
So we are wired for the negative bias. That's what it's called, the negative bias, which might have helped us on the savannah, but it is really not a great way to go through life.
Right. Sure.
So yeah, even if it's taking a couple of minutes every day to focus on what went right. And I try to, like, if I'm in a line at a drugstore that moves quickly, I will make a point to myself. I'll say it out loud, sound like a crazy person. I'm on this fast line. Remember this, because I know that when I'm on a slow line next time, I'll be like, this always happens to me. I have the worst luck. It's just my luck. But it's not. It's random. And sometimes you get the fast, sometimes you get the slow. So be aware of that.
Right. So highlight the times when you get something that works, instead of just having your brain auto highlight the times when it's not.
Exactly. And like whenever I go to airports, for years, I was like, I always get the gate that's like 4.5 miles away.
Oh yeah, sure.
But I started to really pay attention. I didn't make a spreadsheet, but I was like, let's see if this hypothesis is true. It's not. Sometimes I would walk through security and I'm right at my gate, but those times you forget because they're so easy. And the other ones stick in your mind.
I have to do some mental gymnastics by whenever something is auto highlighted as negative, and I usually don't catch it in time. I try to think of like 3 branched off positives. So it's like, oh, this gate is so far away. Great, I get to get my steps in. I don't have to worry about that.
Ooh, I like
burn
that.
Some calories, because that will let me eat like a egg McMuffins later, because I'm getting, burning 500 extra calories walking here with all my stuff.
Right.
That's
a great strategy.
That kind of stuff has to happen.
And
you go AJ Jacobs with it, right? You're like, oh my God, I left my passport at home, and now I'm not going to make my vacation flight on time, and it's going to cost me $1,000. And then you have to like think, crap, what 3 positives are going to come out of this crap sandwich?
Oh, I love that strategy. I mean, I often think of the schadenfreude, your joy at someone else's pain. Sometimes when something is just going really shitty, I'll try to adopt a self-schadenfreude, which is the joy at how horrible things are going. Because I realize, and it helps that I'm a writer, but I think that's going to be a great story. Like when things just go to hell.
Exactly.
It's,
like this is going to be a great post about how dumb I am and how this was all avoidable.
Right.
And that will humanize me in some way to my Instagram or podcast audience, which will then make me more relatable, because I do dumb stuff all the time. And it will make other people feel better about it listening and following me, which will improve my business in some sort of intangible way.
I love it. Exactly.
So it was worth losing $2,000 in a day of my vacation, or whatever it is, right?
And when I was interviewing, I don't do it as much, but I interviewed celebrities for magazines. And one of the keys I find, and I think you're good at this, is to, you tell a humiliating story and show your vulnerability, and they are more likely to tell an embarrassing story about them.
Agree.
I mean, in magazines, it's a little better because you can not print your embarrassing story.
That's cheating. You're like, hey, let me tell you all this stuff to get you to open. And then they're like, well, we're all around that page. And you're just like, snip, snip, snip.
Exactly.
Here's me getting George Clooney's, bathroom story.
I did interview George Clooney once, which was actually great.
In person or over the phone?
It was in person.
That's great.
One thing he told me that I still remember, one piece of advice, was he talked about sort of this delusional optimism has served him well. So when he played high school or college baseball, and he said when he would go up to the plate, he wouldn't just think of, am I going to hit a home run? He would say, I'm going to hit a home run, and it's going to be the left field wall. Like, he would tell himself which wall, left or center or right.
Wow.
And of course, he struck out most of the time, but just that extra optimism increased the number of times that he did get a hit. And I've always found that a really interesting strategy, this delusional optimism. I mean, you don't want to overuse it because, you could be like, oh, I'd be a great president, even though I have absolutely no
Hypothetically, right?
Hypothetically,
yeah,
experience. But in general, I think, especially for entrepreneurs, you need this.
You need it. You do need it. It's funny. Somebody asked me like 10 years ago on a TV interview for some New York news station when I still lived here, what's the key to being a successful entrepreneur, as if I had a clue, right? And my answer was delusional optimism or delusional confidence, I think is what I said. Because it's tough because now you see other people, especially young people, having delusional confidence and you go, you're not doing yourself any favors here. You've got to actually do the work. But as long as you're doing the work, you can go, yeah, this is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
This is going to be huge.
Otherwise, you'll just curl up into a fetal position and eat doodles.
Yeah, I had business partners back in the day where we would get a media opportunity and they'd be like, it's probably not even going to work out. And I'm like, look, I got to be away from you because I need permission to get myself excited. Otherwise, what am I waking up for every day?
Right.
If everything's probably not going to work out, that's not a good way for me to wake up. I need to be like, we're going to get in the Washington Post. And then when it doesn't happen, I'm like, well, that didn't happen. But we're going to be in the New York Times. That didn't. It's fine for me. And this is probably different for everyone. I'm okay being let down here and there. It's part of the game.
Right.
I can't never get excited because I might get let down, though. That's just like, why bother?
I love that. That's a great point. I do think in terms of like, if I were building an organization, I want half the team to be delusionally optimistic, but I do want like the bean counters, the rational people to counterbalance it. So you get a little of both.
You guys can get as excited as you want on a $10,000 budget.
Exactly. Yeah.
Spend it like if there's no tomorrow, except for there is because we saved most of the money. Yeah, that's my wife. I'm like, we're gonna kill it, and she's like, just in case we don't, though. Here's a bunch of backup funding and
it is a good
plan.
balance. That is a good balance.
Yeah. So I get to be like, this is gonna be great, and she's like, yeah, probably, maybe, possibly. If not, we're good. I wonder what percentage of our day we spend in the frustrated or negative mode. Is there any science to this? Have you found anything where it's like, hey, half the population wakes up and we spend 40% of our day worrying?
That's a great. I have not seen any research, anecdotally from my own. I think that for me, I'm still struggling, but I would say over half the time I was in this state of general annoyance, and it's not a good way to go through life.
No.
So I often think one of the most important skills I try to teach my kids is metacognition, which is, being aware of your thoughts. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of standing outside and looking at your thought stream and saying, ooh, that's not a good way to use your time.
Yeah.
And this is a weird strategy, but it works for me. Maybe it'll work for some of your listeners, I'm a big self-talker. I talk out loud to myself a lot.
Out loud? Yeah. Well, that's fine. You live in Manhattan. You blend right in.
Well, yeah, you've got on the one hand the crazies and on the other the Bluetooth, so it's sort of...
Right. Yeah. You look more Bluetooth than crazy.
Well, that's nice of you to say. I dressed up for you. Yeah. But I find it helpful because it makes you more aware of your thoughts. And when you're going into a dark place, which I often do, and repeating this, ruminating on these negative thoughts, you can notice more easily when you're saying it out loud and be like, that is not a good one. That's not a good use of my time. So I don't trust my brain. I think my brain it's so susceptible to these cognitive biases and the negative bias that I've got to keep it. I've got to babysit it all the time. So that is what I like to do. And I find that talking to myself even, maybe you don't do it out loud, but just every couple of minutes taking a pause and like, is this the best use of my brain? Is my brain acting up? Do I need to rein it back in?
That's quite interesting. I can imagine Is there any element of social pressure where you go, oh, I'm having a thought that I don't want to say out loud because it's really bad and people are going to look at me and go, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, if you're talking to yourself, you could just mutter.
Okay.
So you don't have to actually.
Okay. I thought you were just like, I'm narrating everything that's in my head.
Oh, no, no. This is when I'm walking down the street and I would say my thoughts out loud. And I actually find it beneficial in a positive way because, you know, you're aware when you hear a good idea, then you're more likely to remember it. Because I do think one of the secrets to creativity is just quantity. Coming up
for sure.
Yeah.
Have you seen the study? I can't remember what it's called. I call it in my head the pottery study, where they had 3 groups, I want to say, of students making different pieces of pottery. One group was instructed to make the best pot they were all instructed to make the best pots that they could. And one group was instructed to do it by taking a whole month and making one pot and just making it perfect. And the other group was the control. And then another group was make as many pots as you can and then just pick the best one. And the groups, they repeated this in a scientific, whatever, controlled way. And the group that just made 100, 300 pots, they had by far objectively the best results because they just made so many, and the mistakes they made, even when they weren't trying to learn from their past mistakes, it's just like, you can't not make good pottery if you've made 300 freaking pots.
I love that study. I hadn't heard of it.
Check it out. I can't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but the results were the quantity that you get results in the quality that you want. You can't just, and this sort of course, now people are extrapolating this out to anything creative, but it makes sense, right? If you write something every day, most of it might be crap, but eventually what you're creating is going to be decent because you've just made so much crap. It's a numbers game.
And I once did an article on sort of creativity hacks, and I talked to all these professors, and one of them said just that. You know, he said even the greats like Picasso, if you look at his whole he's got a bunch of, you know, a lot of his stuff sucks. But you know, a lot of it's wonderful.
The beauty of abstract art is most of us can't tell which stuff sucks and which stuff is great. It all looks great, and then there's a couple critics who are like, what? That's the good one.
Exactly. Yeah, I can't tell.
The one with the nose on top of the eye is the good one. Duh.
When I worked at Esquire, I once did a quiz. It was supposed to be the hardest quiz ever, and one of the questions was we had an abstract work of genius by an abstract painter, and then we had a painting by a monkey and a painting by an elephant and a painting by a 4-year-old, and I found it very challenging. But
I mean, that's so impossible to judge.
Right.
I find the painting by the elephant probably to be the most impressive because monkeys are close enough to humans. A 4-year-old is a human. One's an artist, and the other one is a freaking elephant with a paintbrush in its nose.
It might have been like just rolled around in paint, but
fair enough.
But fair enough. It was still, but yeah, I agree. The general point is, you've got to go through hundreds of ideas to find the gems. And to me, one of the challenges, which are the gems? Which are the good ones? And that is, I have a couple of strategies that I use. One is just this, is it something that I think about, like in 2 weeks or a month, I'll think back to it and remember it and say, you know what, that's a pretty good idea. So that's a little hint. And
so you use your memory as a filter for good and bad ideas?
I use a memory, and I also use people. I used to be extremely paranoid about telling people my ideas, like, and the delusion that they might steal them.
Right, like, oh, I'm going to live biblically for a year now.
Exactly. And I suppose that occasionally that might happen.
Sure.
But I think the benefits of telling people what you're working on creatively far outweighs the costs, because you could see it in their face, like if they're interested.
Like, what a great idea, or like, and then what are you going to do?
Exactly. Right. It's the facial expression. So yeah, I find that very helpful. And I also, I've noticed that a lot of creative ideas come about because you say it out loud to people and they sort of riff on it. Like I have a friend, Adam Monsbach, who did a Facebook post like, I don't know, 8 years ago. It was just a joke. He's like, oh, my kids are such a pain in the ass. I'm going to write a book called Go the Fuck to Sleep.
Oh, yeah. That's a huge hit.
Yeah, but he was just joking. And then all of his friends, I wish I were one of them who had written this, was like, that's a great idea. You should actually do that. And he's like, well, maybe I should. And he did it. So sometimes, just throw out there, and if people react, you're like, well, maybe I'm onto something.
We'll link to that in the show notes, because there's a version, I think, on YouTube where Samuel L. Jackson is doing the voiceover, and he's like, go the fuck. Right? And it's like a nursery or a lullaby, but it's probably not something you would really
Yeah.
your kids. But it's hilarious because every parent, and I'm not even a parent yet, every parent goes, oh yeah, I need this. I just need to buy this for myself.
Oh yeah, it's a good sanity keeper. I once had a phone call with Samuel L. Jackson. I had written an article for Esquire about my sons and how like they, just be marveling at the testosterone that they exhibited, and realizing that there really is something inborn about being male, and that like they just loved, for instance, anything that had a trigger. They just loved pulling the trigger. I didn't give them real guns. Not
Sure.
that bad parent. But and he optioned it to turn it into a TV show. Never happened, but I remember him on the phone being like, I really related to that part about loving guns. I was like, all right, well, that's your character.
Yeah.
I totally, I see that you live what you.
You were born for this role. That's interesting. He seems like a great. He's one of those guys where I really relate to a lot of the things that he says in some way. I can't remember who was interviewing him. It was a long time ago, and it was probably Conan O'Brien or something, and they said, what's it like being a celebrity now? And it was sort of in the upswing of his career, maybe 20 plus years ago or more now. And he said, I'm not going to lie, it's pretty awesome. Because, if you ask that of somebody else, they'll be like, oh, I'm just so grateful. I'm blessed. I've got work. I mean, blah, blah, blah. He's like, no, this is awesome. I go to buy a flight and it's sold out. And they're like, no, we're giving you a first class seat because you're Samuel L. Jackson.
Snakes on the Plane.
Yeah.
That's probably before that.
That was before that.
That's
I think that was, I don't know if we could say the upswing of your career when you're doing Snakes on a Plane. That was more, he was at that point where he goes, I can do this movie because I'm already famous and no one's going to go, what the hell are you doing?
Right.
Are you broke? They're just like, he can get away.
He was at the point, it's sort of, he could be a self-parody and people will still think he's cool.
Right.
I actually, one of my first experiments in journalism is I was a movie star for a day. And it was,
how did you arrange that?
It was
There's no
freaking awesome.
Flip for that.
Well, it happened a long time ago, so right at the start of my career, and there was a movie out called Shine, which was about a pianist who had schizophrenia, and the actor who played the pianist as like a young man looked exactly like me. His name is Noah Taylor.
That's fortunate.
Yeah, and he's still around, but we found, I was working at an entertainment magazine, and we found out he wasn't going to the Oscars. He didn't like that.
Man.
And they were like, well, what if you went to the Oscars and just pretended to be him and see what it's like to be a movie star for a night?
I assume you did not get his permission to do this.
Did not get his permission. I mean, I never actually said, I'm Noah Taylor. Everyone just assumed it because I look so much like him. I had this sort of terrible haircut, which he had like this sort of, I don't know, page boy and thick glasses at the time. It was a weird look. And, but we rented a limo. I stepped out on the red carpet and it was like a sea of adulation, just like, Noah, we love you, we love you, we love you. And I would just, and I would sign autograph. I never signed his name. I would sign Shine On. That was the name of the movie, was Shine.
Great.
But yeah, the nonstop adulation, it went to my head, and it was A,
that didn't
only
take
at
long.
night. No. And B, I knew rationally it wasn't for me.
Right.
Like they were confident.
It was fake, and it was for like 3 hours, and you're like, I'm great.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize how great I was until now.
It was very bizarre, the power of that celebrity. I mean, I remember coming back to New York, even 3 days later, and I would be online at the grocery and be like, what, do they not know who I am? And I was like, oh yeah, I'm nobody.
Right.
But
I'm a magazine writer. who pretended to be a guy who's not even that famous anymore because the movie's out.
But it was astounding. And people would come up to you and they confess, like, I also had a horrible childhood. Like, they would just open up because they felt they knew you.
Oh, wow.
Will Smith told me he was a fan. It was
at the Oscars.
Yeah, at the Oscars.
Did you feel bad lying to Will Smith? I would feel bad lying to Will Smith.
Well, I didn't lie, remember.
Lie by omission.
Yes, I did lie by omission. Yeah. No, I suppose I got over it.
You should have been like, well, let's talk about it. Give me your phone number. We'll hang out.
Let's do a project.
Yeah. Yeah. I probably couldn't have resisted doing that.
And I did feel a little guilty because, but I knew this guy's agent, and afterwards I wrote him and thanked him and apologized. And he said, I don't know if it's true, but he said that this actor was actually quite grateful that I went in his stead because he didn't like these award shows.
Right, because he basically got the best of both worlds. He got to say, he didn't have to hear anybody complain about how he didn't show up, but he also didn't have to go.
Right, exactly.
Not bad.
It was pretty good. The only awkward moment was Jeffrey Rush was the star of the movie. He played the same character as an old man. And I went up, I was so cocky. I went up to Jeffrey Rush during the Oscars, and I had this fake Australian accent because which sounded more like the Lucky Charms leprechaun. It sounded nothing like Australia. And I went, "Hello, Jeffrey, it's me." And he just looked at me like, who the fuck are you?
Security, yeah.
He did. He said, like, it was like, these guys can't, because he knew the guy, so he knew I wasn't exactly like him.
Man.
So that was super awkward. But the rest of it was fantastic.
How did you not get kicked out of the Oscars?
Well, we had a ticket.
Oh, okay.
So I was just there as supposedly a journalist, but I didn't do any interviews. I just was, the star.
So I can see this conversation going on in the back where they're like, so here's the thing. He has a ticket. He's a journalist. He's kind of not doing the journalist thing. He's doing the thing where he's pretending to be this guy, but he's not really saying he's that guy. And they're just like, just let it go because it's going to be way more awkward if we end up kicking out this guy who everyone thinks is this actor if he's not causing any trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Keep an eye on him.
Well, it's interesting. At the Oscars, none of the action is actually happening in the seats. Like, there's a bar, and all of the stars are just mingling at the bar. So that's where you want to be. You don't want to be watching the Oscars while the Oscars is going on.
I've heard it's like 8 hours. You can't eat. It's kind of like a tedious thing. Or is that might be the Grammys, actually. I can't remember. My friend Dory Clark, I don't know if you
I love Dory Clark.
She won a Grammy. And she was like, the best bit of advice I got was to bring power bars and food to the Grammys because you can't move. It's so long. And I think she said something like, and don't quote me on this, but it was something like, I don't need to do this again.
Interesting.
Yeah, it wasn't like this glamorous amazingness. It was kind of like, okay, come on already.
Right.
I'm hungry. And I'm sitting here in a suit, and it's like cold, and there's
take her
8,000 more people up, next.
Right.
It's 7 hours long.
It's a good problem to have.
I think so. Like, oh, sorry you won a Grammy, Dory. Tough life. So gratitude emerges from two stages, affirmation and recognition. And how do we end up harnessing these types of things?
Well, what I found is, as I said, I think we all are really good at taking things for granted. So when one of my first interviews was with the barista who works at my local coffee shop, and I thanked her for the coffee, and she thanked me for thanking her. And I cut it off there. I was worried we'd go into an infinite loop of thanking. But I asked her, what's it like to be a barista? And she said, it's not an easy job because you are experiencing people in a very dangerous state, which is
uncaffeinated?
Uncaffeinated.
Pre-caffeinated.
Pre-caffeinated. Yeah. So they are not in a good mood. And by the way, she would never do this, but I did read that some baristas, if you're rude to them, will give you decaf.
Oh, burn.
So there's a little selfish motivation to be nice. But she said the hardest part was that people wouldn't even treat her like a human being. They would treat her like, an ATM machine or a kiosk or whatever. They wouldn't look up from their phone. They would thrust their credit card out in her direction, and she would take. And she said that just made her feel terrible.
Yeah.
And I realized when she's telling me this, like, I've done that dozens of times.
Sure.
Yeah. And it made me, it spoke to that second part, the affirmation, recognizing that someone else was doing something for you and affirming it. And so I'm not expecting a Nobel Peace Prize, but I did make a pledge that when I deal with a human being, while they're still humans in the service sector, I'm going to look that person in the eye, make eye contact, and say thank you. And it's actually, like we talked about before, it's a two-way street. It's good for that other person to be recognized as human, but we are programmed for face-to-face interaction, and it actually makes you feel better. So there is a selfish motivation for looking someone in the eyes, saying thank you, or saying, this was an interesting study. Wharton did a study that found that even just mixing up the words thank you and throwing in like I'm grateful is actually more effective. You will get, if you write a thank you note to a potential employer that says I'm grateful instead of I'm thank you, that you will get a higher response rate. So anyway, mixing it up.
Because thank you is so cliche now that it just is losing meaning in written form? Or
that's it.
Okay.
That it's sort of
I can believe that.
A reflex. It's, it doesn't mean anything. But if you're more specific, when I write thank you notes, I try to be very specific, thank you for, and make some reference, thank you for the coffee and, and the cup, and the zarf. That is
Zarf?
Zarf is my favorite word I learned in this.
What is that?
ZARF is the official name for the cardboard sleeve that goes over your coffee cup.
The Java jacket?
Or is that a Java jacket? That's the brand name. That is the brand name. That they were the inventors of, but the zarfs go back to like ancient China when they had like gold zarfs for the emperor.
Oh, so that's not just like a word that came out in 1998.
No, it's an Arabic word.
Wow.
Zarf.
It does sound Arabic.
Yeah, there you go.
I thought it was just play on the words like scarf and something else.
I like that.
But it's not.
Nope, just coincidence.
Huh.
But anyway, yeah, trying to be specific in your thanks, and again, there's a selfish motivation. It makes me feel better.
That's fine. I'm fine with it. Look, if it helps me and it helps the listeners here and the viewers, then I'm fine with it, like also helping someone else. That's fine. If the side effect is other people feel good, then great. But gratitude, as you note in the book, gratitude's hard to keep up with sometimes because when things are done for us well, they're kind of invisible a lot of the time. Like great service at a restaurant, you're just like, oh, that was enjoyable. But you don't think like they nailed this from beginning to end. I wasn't too cold. The food came in just the right amount of time. It was quiet in there. The waitress was polite. Or the server was polite and they gave everything in the right way and the seat was comfortable. You don't, then that's like a you don't make a comment.
No, you don't. I mean, I was thinking about this watching the Super Bowl the other day. Those poor refs. No one ever, actually one, Tony Romo did say on one, he said that was a good call. And I was like, you just don't hear that often because like the refs are invisible until they screw up and then they're the most hated person.
What's this guy even doing here?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Making the rest of the 99% of the rest of the game roll smoothly and quickly.
Exactly. So yeah, it is something when something is done well, we don't even think about it. And that was another big lesson of the book, was that there are all these masterpieces around us that we totally take for granted. One of my favorite interviews was with this guy who designed the lid for my coffee cup, the little plastic lid. And I loved it because I had given zero thought.
Turns any cup into a sippy cup, that kind of thing. that lid, right?
No, was that what it is?
Oh, isn't it it's like it's got the little sippy part and there's a hole and then there's a hole on the other side so air can go in so you don't have that weird.
Oh no, but that's a different one. I mean, I'm grateful for that too. But this guy, his was very very innovative. He was sort of like the Elon Musk of lid designers, maybe a little more emotionally stable, but still very innovative. And his theory was a lid can ruin your cup of coffee because it blocks the aroma, and aroma is such a part of the experience. So he made sure that he shaped the lid so that you could really burrow your nose in, like it's got this sort of indentation for your nose and a bigger hole in the middle. And he even talked about the shape of the opening for the mouth was like this special crescent shape, so the liquid came out smoothly. And it was hilarious because he could have gone on for 8 hours and he was so passionate, and it made me realize there are all these amazing designs that we take for granted, and that people put years of their life into.
It's like 99% Invisible Coffee and Lid Edition.
Exactly. I love that show, and it was the same message, and I started to notice it all the time. Like my desk lamp at work, it's got this little indentation for my thumb on the on-off switch, and it just makes it more comfortable, like 1% more comfortable. But still, the tiny aggregations of all these little things that make our life better are totally taken for granted.
The amount of time that goes into these things, especially because there were probably thousands of lid prototypes, and we're just like, yeah, this is just a lid. It's a trivial part of the experience.
No, it was fun to I mean, I spent like 3 days reading about the history of lids and all the patents, and their lids that turn different colors depending on your coffee.
Do you ever think, like, good thing I'm a writer and a researcher, I'd never get any work done? You had to make this stuff your job, or you would just be screwed, man.
Oh, no, it is. I mean, that's one thing that is dangerous about, I think probably as a podcaster, you feel the same way. You could spend a week just researching lids and you never get anything. Any guest you have are interesting people you could spend.
Yeah, like your whole life turns into the blog by Tim Urban, Wait But Why, where it's like, oh, this post ended up being 32 pages long because there's an 18-page text box about the construction and design of coffee lids that goes on and took me 6 months to create. And you're just like, good thing this is your job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you would be in serious trouble. Gratitude is contagious, also in a way, right? Because people who are helped by others are more likely to help other people and pay it forward. Is that your experience?
Well, one thing, I mean, there was some very interesting article, an op-ed in the New York Times about the dangers of gratitude, because every good thing has its downside. And this woman was very concerned that if you're too grateful, you become complacent. So, and it's almost, she saw it as this right-wing conspiracy, that Walmart will tell the workers, be grateful for your minimum wage job. Just be grateful that you have a job at all.
Positive thinking keeps them docile.
Exactly.
Or whatever.
The opiate of the masses. But it turns out the research says that is not the way it plays out in real life. That actually, the more grateful you are, the more you want to pay it forward. The more you want to help others. And I've seen this anecdotally. Like when I battled depression, and when I'm in a depressed mood, I am not looking out for other people. Like all I care about is getting out of the depression. So this idea of being grateful makes you want to pay it forward. And I saw it play out in small ways. One was just the idea of water. The coffee is 98.8% water. So I went up to the New York reservoir system to thank them for giving us water. And I couldn't believe hundreds of people make our water possible. And it's just this crazy, miraculous fact that we can turn on a little metal spigot and get clean water. And how this is not something that was true for 99% of our human history, still not true for billions of people who have to walk miles for water. So it made me think, this is something I should think more about, and how can I provide access to water for other people? So, it made me get involved in this water charity. And again, I'm not expecting a Nobel Prize, but it was just, it was a real perspective shift. Just the idea. I tell my kids, the cliche about, is the glass half full or half empty? I say, I think that might be the wrong way to look at it. I mean, it's not. It's the fact that there's water in that glass at all, that we can turn on this little lever and have clean water. That's crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. So we should.
In multiple places in your house. Like, oh, I don't want to have to go all the way upstairs. Good. There's 3 options downstairs for me to get water.
I know. It's amazing. I mean,
you never think about that.
Unheard of in human history.
I want to make sure we separate the idea of gratitude versus just positive thinking and like this kind of BS-y self-help stuff. How are the two concepts different? Because it really is different than just positive thinking for the sake of it.
Yeah, I mean, I am, as we talked about, delusional optimism can sometimes be good.
Right.
I like that gratitude is two-way. So, you know, you're making yourself feel better, but you're also thanking someone else and making their lives better. And also to me, the main drawback of positive thinking is when you believe that just by positive thinking you can make something happen, like The Secret. You know, that if you think positively, then your cancer will go away, which I think is a terrible thing, because then if the cancer doesn't go away, you're putting the blame on the person. Oh, you just weren't positive. You weren't optimistic enough. It's your fault that you're dying. So to me, that's the big danger of positive thinking, you know, that it's pseudoscience. But gratitude, I think there's enough scientific backup that it's good for both parties, that there's very little downside that I can see.
What kind of amazing, fascinating weirdness, what kind of big experiment are you working on or looking at next?
Well, one thing is, as part of this book, I like to sort of market it. I said that I would write 1,000 thank you notes to readers of my articles and books.
Oh, wow.
And that turned out, you know, it sounded good, but 1,000 is a shitload.
That's like 3 a day for the year.
So it is. I try to write 10 or 15 a day, and it is like,
wow,
time consuming. You know, in one sense, I love it, because just the feedback I've gotten from people, you know, they tell me what to write in their thank you notes. I set it up on the internet, so it's really good to see what connects with people. You know, what parts of the book. That's very helpful, and you get that with your
I do. I never thought about it as writing a thank you, because I do reply to everything. Sometimes it takes me 2 months, but I will reply to everything, and I'll be like, oh, thanks for listening. You know, are you doing this? What part did you like about that? Maybe I should think about it as a gratitude practice instead of a chore of going through and answering all my
There you go.
That way it's kills 2 birds with 1 stone there.
Exactly. I mean, it's good. But yeah, it's great research, but hugely time consuming. So that has delayed me a little. I'm particularly interested in the idea of fake news and truth, and how, you know, how we know what we know, and you know, how do I know that even the most basic thing, like, you know, how do I know that you are a human and not some sort of
I don't even know. And if I did, I probably wouldn't say anything. That would kind of defeat the purpose of being a really well-crafted robot.
Exactly. You are good. You are really good.
So are we going to go down the fact check rabbit hole? We're like, well, I fact checked this article, but then I had to fact check the fact checker, and then I had to fact check what I so
that's exactly it.
That's interesting.
You got it. Yeah, you can.
I'm trying to think of the title. Is it going to be like fake news? I don't know.
I like that. I haven't decided on.
No, that's a terrible title. It doesn't even make sense for what you're doing. But
real news. Perhaps.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, that's my obsession right now. Just because I think if we can't agree on a truth, then it's going to be hard to solve the big problems.
That's a deep philosophical. That's like a Sam Harris level question.
There you go.
What is truth? And it's like Q 3-hour debate with Jordan Peterson, never getting to any point or any conclusion whatsoever.
I listened to that.
Yeah.
So that was a tough episode to listen.
It was one of those where I went, all right, Sam, I'm going to listen to the next one, but you're losing me here, buddy.
He redeemed himself, though. He admitted it was not. That is one thing I like about Sam and other thinkers, is when they say that didn't work.
Yeah.
And I love to say that about my own work, you know, that might be part of this new book, you know, just going back and fact checking my old books and saying, you know, this does not hold up. Because I think it's important. I listened to Bo, what's the name of the guy who directed 8th Grader? Bo Burnham.
He's a genius.
I love him. But one of the favorite things he said in this, I think it was Fresh Air, was, you know, he likes to go back and critique his old work and disown a lot of it.
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
People go, oh, you know, your stuff is great. I've been listening for years, and I'm just like, I'm almost embarrassed because I go, oh gosh, you heard stuff I made 4 years ago? That was awful. All of it was just universally terrible. Which isn't true, but
not true, but also great that you can say that, because I think it shows, evolution.
I heard David Letterman used to watch every single show that he did every night and then just spend like 3 hours beating himself up, which sounds kind of unhealthy.
No, yeah.
But I think a lot of comedians do that.
There's a mix. I know Meryl Streep watches herself and critiques herself, like watches her rushes. My grandfather was funny because he had a trick he would always play for his friends who were in show business. And he would say, even if he hadn't seen the show, he would go up to them and say, oh, I saw the show last night. What happened? Just with that tone. And they would always go off like, I know. Can you believe that lighting guy screwed up the cue?
Man.
And that is an example of the negative bias that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like we focus on, but probably 98% of the audience didn't notice and had a great time.
Yeah, because of course, what you could do, what happened? I know. Can you believe everything worked out like clockwork? That never happens. And the guest was phenomenal. It's like, we're just thinking about that one thing. So
you'll have to tell me what I did wrong that sticks in our mind.
I don't even think about that stuff in real time, unless, the thing that's bothering, if I had to narrate the thing that's bothering me right now, it would be like all this background noise that nobody noticed until now. Tell me, when this will probably end up as a clip, but the time that you ended up playing Mafia with a bunch of A-listers in New York.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was working at Esquire magazine, and I interviewed David Blaine, who I love. We were talking earlier, because you've interviewed magicians, that a lot of times magicians, they are best at interacting through their magic. Mm-hmm. So it was a challenging interview, because, he would rather just show me card tricks than talk about his childhood. But after the interview, we got along enough that he's like, come on over, we're going to play a game at my friend Ed's house. And the game was Werewolf, which is like Mafia. And the idea is you have 20 people in a group, and one of them is the bad guy, the assassin or the werewolf, and you have to just by asking questions, figure out who the bad guy is. So I got there, and his friend Ed's house was Ed Norton.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
American History X.
Like one of the best actors working today. And it was like a star. It was like everywhere. There's Seth Rogen. There's Paul Rudd. There's Danny DeVito. I'm like, oh my Lord. And here I was, a journalist, and this game is all about acting. So it was like the worst case scenario. Yeah, it was terrible, because I remember it turned out in the end that Ed Norton was the werewolf, the bad guy, but he was so brilliantly convincing. He's an Academy Award nominated or winning actor. He was like, if you pick me as the werewolf, you are a fucking idiot. And he was like, I was so intimidated. I was like, okay, you're not the werewolf. You are definitely not he was the werewolf.
Of course.
So it was, I was so outmatched. It was, humiliating, but wonderful, because you saw, like, it's like playing NBA basketball with like LeBron James. It's like, just watching.
Except for you're in the game instead of just sitting courtside.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
You're going to be humiliated, but just being able to see what they do to mess with your mind is just, it was a fantastic experience.
This is such a, I suppose, Seinfeldian thought, but like, how often can those people possibly even get together in one room? All of them are extremely busy. People, I guess when I was growing up in Michigan, I just thought, like, famous people hang out at the same clubs, the same restaurants, the same bars, they all have the same friends. Maybe, but I am now nowhere near that tier, and I barely have time to do anything. So to get all of them together in one room to play werewolf seems just
I know. I think about that too. But I think part of it is, all of these, like the music moguls who go out every night to clubs, and I'm like, what? I don't go. But I think that's like their office. They held meetings there. Like they do business. So maybe that's it.
Especially in New York. You go to the Comedy Cellar with Justin Silver, a friend of mine who's a comic, and back when he was just getting started, we were friends, and he goes, we showed up at the Comedy Cellar, and I want to say it was like, I looked 10 feet to my right, and it was like, is that Chris Rock, or a guy that just looks like Chris Rock? And no one's bothering him at all. And he's like, yeah, but we can't go sit at that table, because that's the table where, like, Chris Rock sits with
Mm,
Louis C.K. or something. Like,
right.
there's a reason there's empty seats there.
Interesting.
Because you don't just go, hey guys, what's going on? They're like, hey man, you haven't sort of earned the seat at this table.
Right.
And I just thought, but I'm a patron. Don't dumb people like me go up and sit there. And he's like, no. Because they're intimidated and they go, crap, it's Chris Rock. I'm not going to do that. And I thought, what would happen if I just did that?
That's a good experiment.
Yeah, it was a good experiment.
Did you try it?
Yeah, and he was kind of like, look, man, you're here with me. Do not go sit at that table. Because I guess it's like, then they're going, hey, man, control your friend over here.
Right.
Probably wouldn't have happened, but I don't think it would have made him look good. So I decided I got to respect my host here.
I love it.
But you see that. I was upstairs having coffee. Jen left to go set up the lights down here. And I went, that's the guy from Entourage just sitting down in his gym clothes right next to, well, Entourage and a bunch of movies. Adrian Grenier, he's a director now.
Oh, yeah.
Just sitting there. And I was like, oh. And no one's bugging him. Clearly, everybody knew who he was, especially in New York. And I just thought, I kind of want to be like, hey, I love all your stuff. But that just seems so trite. There was no point. So I decided against it. And I realized this is probably the process a lot of people go through.
Well, you should tell him you're a cousin. That's right. That's what I would do.
That's the in.
I did. One of my favorite, when I met Amy Poehler, because I had a friend who was friends with her. And she looked at me and she's like, we've met before, right? And we hadn't, but it made me feel so good that she was like, "Oh yeah, I recognize you. You're in our circle."
Yeah.
So it was probably she says that to everyone.
She's like, "You were that guy from that movie where you're the schizophrenic piano player. I saw you at the Oscars."
I wish she'd said that. But it is I think that is a good strategy. We've been, because it's like, who's going to object?
That is pretty good. And then it's like, no, we haven't. Well, how do you know?
Exactly. I remember our interaction.
Yeah.
You have forgotten it, but I remember.
How do you find if you're a cousin, or we're all cousins, so it's just the safest thing you can say?
Yes. I mean, I would, when I was doing that project, it was crazy. I got photographs with, dozens of celebrities just by using that line. But I tried to, the idea was, I'm not just here to take advantage of you. I told them the message of the book, which was that we're all cousins, so maybe we shouldn't be such assholes to each other. And as long as you have a positive message, then they're willing. If it's all about you, like, I just want a photo with, a celebrity.
Right, it's all about you, yeah.
Then they're not going to do it.
And if it's Larry David, he goes, I don't feel like it right now. I'm walking. I've seen that happen in real life, and I went, wow, he's just really that guy. Because the woman who was with him was like, Larry, just do it. And he's like, I don't want to. I'm walking. It's weird. It's a weird request. And my friend who asked for the photo was just like thrilled because he's getting a real life performance of exactly what Larry David would say.
I mean, he is one of the luckiest people in the world because he has people want him to be an asshole. They want him to be rude to them.
A curmudgeon.
Yeah.
He's not going to play the
he can act as much of a dick as he wants. And that's like, I remember once I was walking with Conan O'Brien, and who's a lovely man and not like Larry David. But one thing he told me, the secret was, people are so primed, they have this bias that he's a funny guy, so they're going to laugh. Once you get to that level, whatever you say, they're going to laugh. So he would make up nonsense syllables as an experiment, and they'd be like, hey, Conan, and he would go, squiddly doo, and they'd be like,
yeah, of course. Oh, that's magical.
He's the guy, that Conan, you're Conan. So it says a lot about, once you get to that level, like the positive bias is so strong that people are, going, which I'm sure is dangerous because that's when you get psychotic delusions that you can be president or whatever.
That's right. Conan for president.
I would definitely vote for him.
I think, given the selection we've got currently, depending on when this airs, then why not?
There you go.
AJ, thank you very much, man.
Thank you, Jordan. I loved it.
And cuts.